we must have special greetings again for this mall here.
With the Gorseth in 2007 coming to Penzance, I thought this is a wonderful opportunity for us in this region to demonstrate our skills, put the lot together, and what else but try and put on a play in Cornish. So I turned to a good neighbour here, John, and said, John, how about a play?
Yeah, well, Howard suggested something which would go down well in Penzance. So it struck me that the best thing to do would be to try to dramatise the history of Penzance in some way. So I produced a few draft ideas which Howard seemed to think would be suitable, and I went ahead from that, taking as many significant happenings in the history as I could find. Clearly something like the birth of Sir Humphrey Davy, the burning of the town by the Spaniards, and the building perhaps of St Mary's Church eventually. These were things which I felt we should incorporate. And going as far back as possible, we started with the idea that Penzance means holy head or headland. So we had this town built there, a port established, fishermen and their boats, and then maybe St Piran came along and gave a flag to the town. But all the time I was bearing in mind the fact this had to be staged, with the children saying appropriate things, and with as many props as possible. It wasn't going to be very elaborate. My idea was that the children should wear something which was basically symbolic rather than be in full dress, so that Sir Humphrey Davy would carry his little flask of laughing gas and maybe have a top hat, and the miner would just carry a little lamp. But in fact the parents got together and they dressed the children up very nicely, and I must say that the parents were very supportive indeed. We couldn't have put it on without their help. The children, of course, I don't know how they were chosen. I was just presented with 8 children and said, here's your cast. And the first casting day was very much a matter of who wanted to do what. Anya, the narrator, immediately volunteered to do the narrating, And I looked around and decided that this one might do this particular part, that might do that particular part. We had tried to allocate each child or each individual a certain amount of time so that no one child appeared on stage longer than another. That wasn't at all easy, since some parts necessarily were longer than others and some parts didn't involve very much speaking at all. However, we got the children reading through the script in English first, and then we got them reading it in Cornish, but of course this is where the difficulties began. They had to learn the pronunciation, which it was my job to impart or teach to them. They coped extremely well. Fortunately, Cornish, as spoken nowadays, is fairly phonetic, and the children simply had to read the words as they appeared, and they came over quite well. The parents helped in that they rehearsed with the children, and I gave the parents a script with the pauses marked in the phrasing so that they didn't run together the wrong words. And slowly the thing began to come together. It took a few weeks for the children to learn their parts by heart. Some were better at this than others were. Some, of course, found it very difficult to get the words or the phrases in the right order. This problem sometimes arises when they're speaking in English. You wonder what the next sentence is going to be. It's trebly hard when it's in a foreign language. So you just have to learn the order by heart. The trouble is that two different lines may begin with the word ni, and you aren't quite sure which words follow the ni. However, in the end, we tried to get the children to understand what it was they were saying. They had the English to refer to all the time, and they eventually coped extremely well.
I was particularly delighted with the way things turned out. It was an inspired performance by everyone involved, including John, because the way he put all these details down, I thought was a pretty good script. But then, when we got the children sorted out and went to the first rehearsals, and I thought, they're never going to make it, And I stayed away for a spell and came to some later rehearsals and thought, could we put this off until Christmas? But on the night, it was outstanding. They literally put their hearts and souls into it. They knew what they were saying, as John has described. They understood it, and they were understood by many in the audience. This was extremely important from the point of view that the Cornish language has seen a growth of 100 years or so, and I really wonder what Henry Jenner would have said had he come along to this performance. Because the 1st of September in 2007 is the beginning of the academic year when Cornish is becoming available throughout the schools of Cornwall. Initially the secondary schools and then the primary schools. Well, here we had a bunch of primary school children showing them just how to do it. So that was important, but also my home parish, family have lived here for a century or two, and of course we saw the activities of Bernard Walk, who came in here as the priest from just before World War I to the 1930s. And during that time, Bernard Walk's play, Bethlehem, was picked up by 2LO, the London-based broadcasting company. And before he finally conceded to allowing his play to go out, the director of that company came down to see him personally, Mr. Reith, and said, we have now become the British Broadcasting Corporation and we would like to broadcast from St Hilary. And that became the very first outside broadcast of the BBC. So here we have a double with not only the very first outside broadcast, but hopefully a broadcast now through this tape, which will go much wider than just our concert audience of young children having learnt Cornish to a degree within 6 or 8 weeks and put on this wonderful performance. So you did well, John.
Thank you very much. I must say one thing more in praise of the children, because it was not just a matter of standing up on stage and mouthing the words. My fear was that the audience, who understood no Cornish at all, would have no idea of what was going on stage. And so we did provide a few programme notes just to set the scene on what was happening. Sir Humphrey Davy, John Wesley coming to preach. But I impressed as far as I could on the children that it was going to be the expression they put into their performance which would carry the audience along with them, so the audience could feel they understood what was happening simply by the motion, the movements, the emotions, the facial expressions of the children themselves. And this was not so easy to begin with because we were rehearsing initially in a very small space. We didn't have a stage until the holidays. It was only 3 or 4 rehearsals in which we actually were on stage. But marrying movement and emotion and the use of props and the handling of props together resulted in fact in a lively performance, one which everybody enjoyed, that I've spoken to, even though they didn't understand a word what was being said. But they were just impressed by the way the children were animated enough to put their message across.
I feel it's very important that without a language you haven't got a culture, and these children have demonstrated in 1st of September 2007 we have a language.
Indeed, yes.
Ceslywena, Ewan Parker Hpward a Vormius Gwari Martha Star in Canuig, la Cescan Gorseth Kernow. Hem o cam the lays raganiaeth, drefen and fleches, the visky and scon, ha the worry and fraith. God on Muras, the Ewan Parker, the Hpward Kernow, then fleches hag a herons, ha hetmouth and skull, Muras. Congratulations! John Parker and the children created a wonderful play in Cornish for the Gorseth Kernow concert. This was an important step for the language because the children learnt quickly and performed fluently. We are grateful to John Parker, Hpward Kernow, to the children and their parents, and of course to the school. Thank you.